Hey everyone, and welcome back to Citywide Blackout, your home for the best creators from around the world. I'm your host Max Bowen, and joining me now, he has a soon-to-be-released comic out that I am totally a fan of. Artist and creator Jade Lowder joins me. Jade, welcome to the show, man. It's so cool to have you here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Max.
All right. So you have a Kickstarter currently going for your soon-to-be-released comic. It's a horror show, The Date. And I've already read it, so I know what happens, and it is such a cool comic. But one of the cool things is you just started this thing a couple days ago, and you've already surpassed your goal. So I guess we should just go home then. Show's over. We're done. No, we got a lot to talk about here. But I guess I want to ask first just how it feels to, this is like your first comic, and you're already past your goal by like $200.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty exciting. I was definitely a little nervous kind of going into it. Working with lesser known comics this time around to release this book has been really great. They've done a lot in terms of promotion and then just getting my stuff out there, and also kind of like walking me through how all the Kickstarter stuff kind of works. And so they kind of let me know that November it ends up being kind of like a little dead moment for Kickstarter stuff, that October is the big one. And so, but we decided, push through, make it happen. And I'm glad that we did, and that it worked out the way that it did. I think it's the response has been really great to see people get into it. And for me, just kind of working in my own little bubble and vacuum and maybe showing it to a couple of friends here and there, to have people who get into it is pretty awesome to see.
Yeah. And just looking at the campaign, there's a lot of like cool rewards here. Of course, you kick in just $5, you get your digital copy of It's a Horror Show, The Date, and there's other things too, actually, because you also have variant covers, and you have a printing of your other comic, It's a Horror Show, the critique, which is like a two-parter. And the critique, that one was hilarious. I read that one too. The thing I will just say, guys, and no other spoilers, horror movie tropes. That's what this one's all about, and it is brilliant. I'm curious as to where the idea for this one came from, because it's so like tongue-in-cheek with like the horror genres.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. As a comic book creator, I'll take classes and do other stuff to kind of like, to help kind of strengthen my chops and that kind of stuff. So I took a portfolio creation course through the Kubert School, and I was working with an artist named Joe Prado, who does like Green Lantern, Darkest Night. He did the inks on that, and Blackest Night is what I meant. And so in the assignment, it was just to do like 3 or 4 pages of whatever we kind of wanted. And so I had worked with Joe a little bit before, and I said, I want to do something that's just going to make him laugh. And it ended up turning into this little short story, The Critique. My younger brother and I are big horror fans, and so he's kind of like my silent writing partner in a lot of ways. That I'll call him up and I'll just tell him like, all right, I have this idea for a story. Now tell me if this is funny or if this is going anywhere. And so that's kind of how that story happened. I knew I wanted to make Joe Prado laugh, and do something that was going to like be kind of fun to do and challenge myself just art wise, but also have a really succinct story in like 3 or 4 pages and have it down. And then it was kind of like came from a phone call with my brother of just like talking about these different horror ideas, and how like every time I gravitate towards horror, I always veer away from doing like killers. Like it's just not my thing. Like I like monsters, that's monsters, ghosts, that kind of shit. And so I was like, well, what would happen if I did a killer story? And so it became very much like my the critique is also my critique of like the horror genre, especially slashers in general.
Nice, yeah. All right, now you've mentioned lesser known comics earlier on, and of course we know them very well. Really good friends of the show, love their work, and folks, definitely check their stuff out if you get the chance. You will find something you like, I promise you. How'd you get connected with them, and what's been the process of working with them?
Yeah, it was back last spring that Mark and I started talking. It was just, I can't remember who followed who on Instagram first or something like that. But we just kind of started digging each other's stuff. And then we started kind of DMing back and forth, just talking about like, him saying, "Oh man, I dig your stuff." And then me saying, "Oh man, I dig your stuff." And kind of that, back and forth. And then we started having longer conversations about potentially working with each other in some regard. And so we started off on a process of Mark is writing a book right now that I'm going to be illustrating, and that's going to be coming out next year. And so that's in the process. That's in the tank right now. And then I had this book that I was just wrapping up while we were talking. I was wrapping up the date. And we decided, oh man, you know what? Let's put this out through Lesser Known Comics and make that happen. So it just kind of came from just us, just kind of chatting and just kind of being fans of each other. And it's been a super great relationship so far. Like I said earlier, they've been really, Mark has, and then all the other creators at Lesser Known Comics have been really great about sharing advice about how to release, their stuff on Kickstarter, how to just do for it or whatever. Like they've been really great at like just knowledge sharing from the different indie creators that are a part of the Lesser Known kind of team right now. And so yeah, it's a fantastic group of artists and creatives to be working with and to be making stuff alongside of.
I love how this all started from you just following them on
Yeah.
Instagram. It really can be the smallest things, and of course, Instagram I think a great resource for connecting with other creatives because so many people post their photography or their comics. What about Lesser Known really drew you in?
Yeah, I mean, I think partly was some of the other artists that I noticed like working that I was like, oh man, their stuff is really cool. I liked that the books that a lot of that they've done were kind of, if not directly horror related, like horror in that kind of ballpark, I guess. It was all kind of like connected in some way. And so that to me drew me in. I was like, oh man, here's some people that are thinking along the same kind of like wavelength. And then as Mark and I started talking about like what Lesser Known really is it's more of like almost like an artist incubator. It's a space for artists to get the books out and to use Lesser Known Comics as kind of like, I think Mark often uses the analogy of like a megaphone to like blast your message out, using the Lesser Known kind of megaphone. And so I think that's what like drew me in is like I retained all of the kind of control as a creator. I don't have to do something I was like not interested or not into just to kind of pay the bills. It was more of like, oh, this is what I want to do. And I want to put it out there. And their Lesser Known is a really great vehicle to like do that and to really respect and honor the kind of artist and like their initial intentions for stuff.
Okay, I know playing favorites is not a good thing, but I want to ask any comics of Lesser Knowns that you are a real fan of?
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm trying to remember when it came out. I think it was back maybe in June, and it was a book called Good Night, and it's just a great little story. It's got such a good little twist there at the end.
Oh my god, yeah.
The
Jesus
art,
Christ.
yeah, the art is like it's simple, but it's really effective in the way that it pulls you into it and tells this seemingly innocent story, but that gets creepier and creepier and creepier as you kind of go with it, which is really nice. The other one, it hasn't been released yet, but I'm so excited to read it, is Yuriko, which is the kind of Korean vampire story by David Lujan, and I'm super excited to see that one. I cannot wait to read that. And then, I mean, there's others too that I'm like, Tank McGregor. I'm super into Tank McGregor. I really love everything. Again, some of the books haven't come out yet, and all I get to see is snippets. I'm like, that I love this. I haven't read all of it, and I love it already. But there's like chiasm and tights, and oh man, it's such a good group of creators, and so many awesome projects happening.
Yeah. Oh, geez. Yeah. There is such a wide array of titles too. Like, it's not just horror or action or comedy. It's a blend of everything. How would you say that for indie comics? How do you think that the landscape's changed?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's so many more possibilities for how indie creators can kind of like get their stuff out and then also reach their audiences. I think like back in the day, it was just like you built it up through just going to cons. You built it up through. I mean, that's still like part of it, right? Like there's still the things that are in place that have always been in place and probably will always be in place. But it used to be so much more of like, building this this thing from just locally, like putting your stuff into your local comic store and hopefully you gain an audience that way. And now, like you can sell stuff to people that are all across, the world that just connect to you randomly through like a hashtag or something that find your stuff. And then there's suddenly fans. It's like, there was this other creative who found my stuff just through like a hashtag one time, like punk rock or something like that, and found the date and was like super into it. And we've been chatting a bunch, and it's just like, that only happened through like this, like using hashtags and stuff. So I think that like the possibilities are amazing. That I mean, obviously that social media has kind of like helped engage the artist with their community. But beyond that, I think too that like the algorithm is going to be a thing that I think may become detrimental to the creative. That like if it keeps being that demonstrative, I'm worried that creatives won't, like, as much as I think it opens up so many possibilities to reach a wide audience, I think that like the algorithm almost like pens it in too much, that you're like, well, I'm not getting my stuff out to actually who needs to see it, which is a bummer.
Exactly. All right, then let us change lanes here from algorithms to It's a Horror Show. The date. This is your main title, all about a werewolf a werewolf punk rocker, which is such a cool thing to see. Encounters this damsel in distress on his way to his next gig, but she ain't what she says she is. And I'll stop right there. Now, you did the writing and the art for this. I want to talk about your art style, because your art style very much reminds you of Hellboy. It has a very, very Hellboy look to it. And you mentioned earlier that you went to Kubert School. How'd you like devise the style?
Yeah, sure. So at like, as you can probably see from my t-shirt that I'm wearing currently.
That's right.
I've got the BPRD shirt, rocking that right now. Yeah, I mean, Mignola and kind of like all the Hellboy artists, whether or not that's, like Gabriel Ba or John Heron or anybody like that. It's just like those artists that Dark Horse got to do the BPRD stuff and the Hellboy stuff were super influential and kind of always have been. I super dig their stuff. So I mentioned I attended online for the Kubert School. I was one of those kids back in the early 2000s that dreamed of going to the Kubert School because of the backs of Marvel comics, that it was like there was always like a little flyer in there for the Kubert School. And I always thought it'd be, oh man, this is what I'm going to do. This is where I'm going to go. And then come time for college and realize it's not a 4-year school. It's not a university. It's more of like a trade school. And my parents weren't down with that. And so they were like, no, we want you to get a full university kind of like education. And so it's all good. It worked out. I went and got 2 degrees. I'm actually, my day job is as a college professor. And so I teach art and I teach drawing specifically. But but as a result, I kind of like put comics on the back burner for a really long time. And so being in the kind of position I'm at now, and COVID kind of locking us inside, I came back in a hard way. And I was like, I want to see what it would be like to make a comic now instead of as a kid. And, there's several books that I don't think will ever see the light of day that I made in that process that are just like, there were some learning steps to kind of get to this. So the date feels much more like this is currently kind of where I'm at in terms of my chops, in terms of kind of where storytelling, all that kind of stuff. The art style, man, I don't know. It's just kind of what comes out. Without giving, it sounds like such a throwaway answer, but unfortunately that's the answer I feel like it's a natural way for me to draw, how I like drawing my characters. It flows out that way. There's not a whole lot of strategy in terms of I want my characters to have this kind of style. It's this is just the style that comes out. Try as hard as I could to do something else. It's inevitably it's going to look like this. The only other thing that I could say is that I like giving my characters a strong silhouette so that they're very clearly different than any other characters in the same story. So I'm always thinking about them in terms of basic loose shapes of shapes. And then the characters and the style kind of comes from that. So if there is any strategy, if there is anything specific I'm doing, it's just it's focusing on the shape of each individual character to make them unique from anybody else in the story.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's talk about the Werewolf Punk Rocker, because I dig the character. Tell us more about him and where did he come from?
Yeah. So last year, so I also have a Patreon, and that was an easy way for me to just put art out there and have a landing page for all the comics and stuff that I do. And so last October, so this would be October 2021, I decided I was going to do a one-page comic every week for October instead of doing the whole Inktober thing. And so the first one I did a double-page spread. And I was listening. I'm really into punk and all that kind of stuff, and I was really into the Cramps, specifically at the time, the band the Cramps, and they have a song called "I Was a Teenage Werewolf." And there's a music video for this where the whole band is in this hot rod cruising in the desert, and they're singing this song. And I was like, man, wouldn't it be cool though if there was a werewolf actually there, and he was all punk rock themed and stuff. And so I made this little double page spread for the month of October that had the werewolf in it. And I had such a good time drawing him. I was like, man, I just like drawing him. I'm going to do something longer. And then the story kind of evolved from there. And I thought okay, what, if I were to take this double page spread of what happens in it is just essentially cruising through the desert, goes to a bar, puts on a song, and just essentially murders everybody in the bar. And I was like, okay, what happens immediately after that? And then the writing process was went from there. That's where the date kind of came from. It was the next thing up, he's got to go get gas, and he's munching on some dude's arm that he picked up at this gas station, or at this bar that he's munching on, and away we go.
And he's kind of a bit of an anti-hero too, because and this is within the first couple of pages, so it's not a huge spoiler, but he saves the damsel who is being sort of approached by these three say less than gentlemanly individuals, and he dispatches them fairly readily. So is he kind of a good guy or a bad guy or something in between?
I don't know that I want to answer that question of clearly say he's one or the other. I think that monsters are more fun when they're neither. They're just chaos, I think that I was talking about this with somebody recently about the Disneyfication of horror. That too often we fill in the blanks of these horror characters and stuff like that. We got a prequel to Norman Bates, we get prequels to all these characters, and we're filling all these these blank spaces of these villains and monsters. And I don't want to do that. I want this character to be whatever you want. Is he a hero? He could be. Is he a villain? He like, I mean, he killed a bunch of people. Like he massacres a lot of people. Like it's fair enough to call him a villain. But like as a monster, I more just want him to be kind of an enigma, and you don't know. And I like that more. Is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? Is the FBI agent, like that I kind of like interject, which is maybe too much of a spoiler, but that's okay. Is she, the good guy or the villain? I don't know. Yeah. So a roundabout way of answering.
Yeah, no, it's cool, man. It's cool. And I do like the ending because you're very much opening it to more issues down the road. Was that always the plan, or did you think this might be a one-off?
So when I originally wrote it, wrote the script out for myself, it was going to be a one-off. I was like, no, I'm writing him out. This is the end of this. And then I started like, through the process of drawing the book and whatnot, I was approaching the end, and I thought, it'd be really fun if I included something that like could stretch it out, potentially give like some moments for a sequel, to give something like that. To just open up the possibilities a little bit. And so, yeah, the kind of it's almost like a post credits. It's almost that like kind of came out of just wanting to connect it, wanting to build a larger mystery than just this kind of one-off, more moderately kind of simple idea that the date is.
How long did it take to make this? I'm very curious.
So
that long,
complicated answer. No, well, I mean, I was drawing it for a long time, but the problem is I wasn't drawing it consistently for a long time. Like there were big gaps in when I was working on the book. So I started the book last November, is when it started, and then there was big gaps. So I was taking classes online at the Kubert School, and then I also teach classes, and so like there's just huge chunks of time where I just don't have any time to do anything. And so I made, like almost half the book. And then I kind of sat on it for a while, and I'm like, I don't know if I'll ever finish it. We'll see. And then I started talking with lesser known comics. I was like, you know what? I'm going to finish this. And this is going to be the thing that I see if they want to put out. And that's pretty much what happened. And so then I kind of like, there's a big gap, and then I came back to it, and it took, when I sat down and finished the last 15 pages, it was a matter of like a month maybe to finish the last handful of pages.
Wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, the pace, when I'm actually doing it is quite fast, but like when I'm doing the thing where I have, a real job and all that kind of stuff, it ends up grinding the wheels pretty hard.
Now, this is your first comic, right? Your first like published comic?
Yeah. I kind of self-published the release of It's a Horror Show, the first one, kind of on my own. But it was like such a small batch, and I kind of did it as like I got invited to do this art fair, and I was like, man, I really want to have some comics there, because that's what I'm currently working on. So I like rushed, got this thing together. That's actually how the critique even became a comic, because it was just like an assignment. And I was like, this would be fun to print. And so that's how that even went to print in the first place. And so I printed that first one, and yeah, and actually it helped so much, like being able to work with lesser known comics, because when I approached them and we were talking, I was like, oh yeah, I printed and I used Comics Wellspring to print, and that's who lesser known comics prints with. And they're like, oh, so you already know the printing process, so there's like, we don't really have to hold your hand about how to like get your stuff to print. I was like, oh no, I've already done it. So like there's, we're good in that regard. So it actually like kind of sold me even more to lesser known, the fact that I printed something before. But yeah, I mean, so in the broader scope, this is my first Kickstarter for sure, and it is more or less the first full issue I've done, because the critique is a mini comic at best. And so this is the date is the first full length comic that I will have published and put out there.
Now, I imagine that like any good creative, you have a bunch of ideas right in the back of your head. Anything else that you really want to work on for your next project?
Yeah. So, like I said, there's that project I'm illustrating with Mark from Lesser Known Comics, but then there's also so in the date, there's a band that the werewolf plays with, and they're called the Men Possessed, and it's a kind of a monster band plus a regular dude named Chad on guitar.
I want to know about Chad. What is Chad's deal?
Yeah. So I want to take that band and I want to do potentially a series with them or a couple of one-offs. Who knows exactly what I'm going to do. I have the basic plot figured out. And that's the next thing that's going to happen in 2023 is we will have the return of the werewolf and some of the other characters from the date, but it's going to be a real romp into the kind of punk rock band that we see only, like just for a few pages. But it'll be a full focus story based on them. And I think it should be a lot of fun. Yeah. Like Chad, I think Chad came out of this one out of necessity because I had like all the members of the band. I wanted them to be like monster characters who have been kind of like corrupted in a way. So like, the werewolf has been bitten there's so much mythology about the werewolf, going to France and whatnot of being like linked to serial killers and all this kind of stuff. And then you have the Wendigo who's on drums, who's like, again, is a man, but like turned into this vicious monster. And then you have Mr. Hyde on bass. And so Mr. Hyde, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, he is again kind of a man that like is feeding off of his own id instead of, being arraigned in by his ego. Right. And so I wanted all the band to be primarily members that were kind of monsters like that. So when I got to having the last member, the fourth member, I couldn't think of another monster that like fit. I was like, it'd be funny instead of like trying to find a monster that maybe doesn't fit. It's just like a regular dude, like a regular guy. Because I think there would be some really good comedy that could come out of like having a whole monster band and then some regular guy. And so that's how Chad kind of came into existence. And I kind of drew him based on some of the other like musicians that I know. Like I could probably point to 2 or 3 people in my direct friend group that are like, that's Chad right there.
I don't buy that Chad's a regular dude. I just like when I got to the Chad scene, I thought, okay, something's up with this dude, and we're gonna see this in a future issue. I just know it.
That can be fun to play with. We will see what the future has in store for Chad.
There you go. All right. Now you mentioned earlier that you're a teacher. You teach art. Have you ever had a student who kind of like knew of what you did and say, "Hey, I want to like do comics too"?
Yeah, I've been able to. So I have a lot of flexibility in what I'm able to teach and stuff like that. A lot of the curriculum is kind of up to me, and so I interject comics a lot into it. And over this past summer, I was able to teach the first comics class at Montana State University. It was an all comic book course, and that was a lot of fun. I had like a bunch of students who were like, "Yes, this is the path that I want to go down." And so it was like a 8-week. No, it was 4. Jesus, feels like forever. It was 4 weeks. It was a 4-week intensive, like 5+ hours a day in the studio making comics. And it was so much fun. And yeah, I had a number of students who like, that's what they want to do. And so after that class, they're still, around at MSU, and they've been showing me their comics and stuff that they've been working on in between that class and now. And man, it's super cool to see some of these younger students coming out with some like really cool stuff that I hope that they publish. I hope they get it out there, because I'm just like, I just want to read this more than anything. I want to read this.
It's so cool that you've been able to inspire these students to kind of pursue what they love to do, and that you actually got to create a comic class. And I want to take this class. I want to take this class, even though I can't draw worth spit, but I can take this class.
It was a ton of fun. Yeah, I mean, I kind of approached it as like really to do comics, you don't really need to know how to draw that well. To be honest, like there's tons of great comics that like are done like with pretty fairly rudimentary simple art, but like the story is what's more important. And so like the real focus of the course was really just on storytelling and making making your comics more clear and readable and all that kind of stuff. And so even if like a student wasn't, had like super chops or something like that with drawing, they were still able to tell some really engaging stories, matching to their kind of art style, which was, a lot of fun to kind of work through.
Well, stories I can do, and thank God I don't necessarily need to know how to draw, because that ship will never sail.
Gotcha.
Yeah. All right. Will you be doing other comic classes?
TBD.
Gotcha. Well,
you never know. Like my the kind of way that like my contract and stuff like that works at my college, it's always kind of like, ooh.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Have you had the chance to get out to any cons to kind of talk about your work?
Yeah, I was at New York Comic Con, but I didn't table. Oh my God, like the wait list for a table at New York is huge. But I was able to go, and I brought my portfolio loaded up on like an iPad, and I was able to talk to some other creators and just kind of show them what I was up to and stuff like that. And so some of the artists and stuff that I worked with at the Kubert School were actually there having a table. So like Joe Prado, who I've mentioned, name dropped a couple of times now, he's an art, he works from Brazil. And so that it's so cool that the Kubert School did online classes. Otherwise, I'd never get to have the chance to work with him, because he lives in Brazil, but he was at New York Comic Con. So we got to hang out finally. And I got to show him kind of what I've been working on since his classes and stuff. And some other creatives like that gave me some critiques of my, kind of current portfolio and whatnot. And it was really helpful. And I even met up with, like there was another indie creator who had a table there, and we talked just books and projects. And we've stayed in contact since then via Instagram and stuff. And they've been following my Kickstarter and all that stuff, which has been really cool to see. So like made some good contacts. But that was my first con, and it's like the second biggest like in the States. And it was mind-blowingly huge. I think like the numbers were like 200,000 people were there. And yeah, it was intense. But in 2023, I have plans of doing like tabling and being at some cons. So as a part of lesser known comics and whatnot, I think there's talks of potentially doing Emerald City Con in Seattle. And then I know I want to try and hit Baltimore with the crew next year, because that looked like a hell of a lot of fun.
Come to the Northeast, please. We want to see you at our cons. Yeah, I actually just went to the Rhode Island Comic Con last weekend, and that was so much fun. It was really like the first time the event was fully back, because they did have it last year, but there was all kinds of restrictions in place, so it wasn't quite the same. But this was the first time I was like, man, this feels like it's back to normal. It's so good. Yeah,
that's awesome. I think that like stuff, now that stuff is kind of like opening up more, and I hope it continues to open up more, and not we revert back to the kind of our weird cave dwelling lifestyle. So like, as long as things keep opening up, like I'm super excited to try and get out there more and to do that kind of stuff. Yeah. Being out here on, in the mountain state, there's not a lot of cons around me. So it's a lot of traveling for that kind of stuff. But I know that there's a lot of cool stuff that goes down in the Northeast, con wise. And so I think that would be definitely an area that I would want to hit for sure.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious as to what got you into comics in the first place. Like, what was your first comic?
I think it was Wildcats.
Nice. Good choice.
I think it was an image. Choice. I think it was an Image comic. I don't know that it was my choice. I think it was just like, it feels like almost like a fever dream. Like one of my earliest memories, like, I'm a little bit of a youngster in terms of, I'm an 89 baby. And so, early 90s and stuff like that. I remember my family we were living in Arkansas, and I remember like around like 4 or 5 having a comic in my hand and like looking at it, not being able to really connect the story to everything, and like some of the stuff is way over my head, but I specifically remember like some of the characters from Wildcats, and then now as an adult, like going back and reading that stuff, I'm like, oh my God, I had this. I think this was, but like in terms of my actual first comic that I specifically remember, it would probably have to be, I'd want to say it was like X-Men or Superman, but it probably was like Superman. And it was probably back in the 90s when they did the whole like Superman split into two beings, and he was like the blue and then the red Superman. It was like, this is weird. And I objectively, it is dumb. Like as an adult, it was a dumb ploy, but unobjectively, as like a kid who just loves the nostalgia of it, I'm still super into that. I really love the blue and the red Superman. So yeah, it probably was one of those.
Yeah. My first comic was Avengers West Coast. I forget the number, but it was when they fought Magneto with fairly predictable results.
Yeah.
Nothing really significant in the overall story, but that was the first thing I bought, and it was just like off to the races after that. I got my subscriptions to Amazing Spider-Man and X-Force. And nice. It was just, this was back in the day, way before we had digital anything, frankly. So it was like what you saw on the racks at the grocery store, if you had a comic shop in town. And yeah. Finding like Newbury Comics was like a gold mine for me. I was like, oh man, they have a lot of stuff here.
Oh yeah. I super miss the newsstand days. Like I get why direct sales had to happen. Like I totally get it. It makes sense. I get it from a purely, mindset. But like, I'm also like, man, but walking into a grocery store as a kid was such a like a nostalgic thing of like, you go to the magazine racks and you're just like praying, like, oh my God, please have the new issue of this or whatever. At the time, like that I was really getting into comics. That's how I did all of my collecting, because there was no comic book shop anywhere near where I was living as a kid. And so it was the newsstand or nothing. And so I think, thank God, I was like the only kid into comics in my small little town. Otherwise, like I probably would have like not been able to collect anything because other kids would have grabbed it. But so like I have such strong memories of like go into the news rack and or the spinner racks that would be next to your Daniel Steele novels and like pulling out,
which is two weird things to put together.
Yeah, totally. But I mean, that was like my education in comics and stuff. I think when I was a kid, I really collected a lot of like Wolverine. And I was super into that. I think as any kid, I think every kid is into Wolverine at some point. Same thing with Spider-Man. We all have our phases, but I was definitely a Marvel kid growing up. I was for sure like I was a Marvel kid for a really long time. And then I discovered Hellboy, and it was all over. And I was like, yeah, no more Marvel. So much other stuff now.
Oh yeah, man. All right. Well, Jade, we are coming to a close here, man. Don't want to do it, but sooner or later, it's got to happen. And for the folks at home, if you're listening, the Kickstarter is still going for a little while longer. Yeah, they met the mark, but if they keep going, it can support more comics and more printing. It keeps the whole thing going. So get out there. It's not a lot of money, and make this thing happen. And you can go to Jade Lowder, JadeLowder.com. You can check out his other amazing art. He's done gallery showings, and it's some fantastic work. And of course, support the comic. It's a horror show. It's definitely worth it. And Jade, great talking to you, man, and definitely looking forward to the next comic.
Yeah, thank you so much, Max. I appreciate it.
Hi, this is singer Kate Eppers, and you're listening to Citywide Blackout.
Okay, everyone, that brings this episode to a close. You can follow the show on Facebook under Citywide Blackout and Twitter and Instagram under Citywide Max. Get at me at citywidemax@yahoo.com and check the show out wherever you find your favorite podcasts, as well as every Saturday at 10 p.m. on Boston Free Radio. That's all for now, and I'll see you next time.